We have breaking news out of both the White House and the Kremlin at nearly the same time. A phone call was completed today between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump of the United States, and they're trying to, first of all, see if they could come up with an agreement for a ceasefire. You may recall that last week in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, the United States delegation met with the Ukrainian delegation. They came out agreeing that they would push for a full 30-day ceasefire, not just on the air and sea as the Ukraine side had wanted, but across the board. So now then the much anticipated call today was between Putin and Trump. And then we were trying to find out, what happened. Well, as it turns out, we now have some information. A lot of this is sketchy because a lot of the details have not been provided. We do have a readout from both Washington and from Moscow. We're going to get to both of those. We have already from Trump, actually on his Truth Social, he's already taken to the air to provide the first level of information. And he says here the key parts are: my phone conversation today with President Putin of Russia was a very good and productive one. We agreed to an immediate ceasefire on all energy and infrastructure with an understanding that we will be working quickly to have a complete ceasefire and ultimately an end to this very horrible war between Russia and Ukraine. The key parts that there is that the first note we got was that we did not come out with a full 30-day ceasefire. And it's kind of interesting what was actually agreed to. And I think this is kind of starting to really demonstrate where the leverage lies and what leverage the Ukraine side doesn't have. Because as we speculated going into this, there was really, it would be disadvantageous to the Russian side because they have the leverage to just have this 30-day ceasefire unless they got a lot of sweeteners or unless they got a lot of ads that gave them something that they don't already have. Otherwise, that they would have no motivation. As it turns out, the key elements of this 30-day ceasefire is an air only on energy and infrastructure, not just air generally, only on energy infrastructure in both Russia and Ukraine, and on infrastructure like port infrastructure, for example, in Odessa. That's been a target a lot, or there's been some targets on the Russian side a lot. Now, this, along with there's also, in addition to the energy and ports, there's also some issues in the Black Sea that may also refer to the port in Odessa, maybe some of the places where the Russian fleet is docked. Those details we still haven't gotten yet. That's one of the things we're waiting on. But so far, saying that they wanted a ceasefire on the air attacks on infrastructure, on energy infrastructure, they were specific on that, at least from what's been revealed so far, and on the Black Sea issues. Those are nearly the only two parts that would benefit Russia. And they really don't benefit Ukraine that much. They have some benefit because they've obviously been the victims of quite a lot of aerial attacks, long-range strikes, et cetera, on their critical infrastructure throughout the entire country, because Russia is able to do that with something close to impunity. And it's been just devastating for the Ukraine ability to have energy, not just heat, not just electricity, but their ability to have industrial capacity to make the weapons and ammunition of war. So Ukraine will benefit from no more of that, but the damage, the cumulative damage that's been done over the last year and a half is pretty significant. Now, the one place that Ukraine has been having some success in the last even couple of weeks is they've had a couple of big strikes on oil refinery processing places and oil depots deep inside of Russia. There was a huge one just a few days ago that at least the facility could handle up to half of the refinement capacity within Russia. The whole thing wasn't damaged, but it did harm their ability. So for Russia to no longer have to worry about that part, at least for the near term, that benefits them more than it does the Ukraine side, because Ukraine was limited in how much they could even attack Russia. So that will help. That would help a little bit. And certainly in the Black Sea, that has been the one area that the Russian Black Sea fleet has been shown to be quite vulnerable really throughout the entire war. So that would also be a help. But what it did not include was any aerial attacks, just in general. For example, nothing about airstrikes on tactical targets, missiles, rockets, drones, on any of the tactical areas, command centers, frontline troops, enemy vehicles, etc. That's all still on. That's just still a go. That would have benefited the Ukraine. If they had gotten a complete air ceasefire, then all that would have stopped. They didn't. So now then that will definitely continue. And in fact, one could argue that it may actually increase because now Russia is free not to have to worry about striking into these other issues, so they can service different targets and additional ones on the front lines there. There's also no pause whatsoever in the ground fighting. And as you saw, or actually not as you saw there, but as we'll see here when I show you the U.S. readout in a minute, that is one of the things that they're working towards. So one of the other things here that part of the what's required next and what they're going to do, both sides have said they're going to talk about the trying to get a full ceasefire. So that's not off the table, but they said they're just going to continue to talk about it. Some of the things that have been revealed of late, that if there's going to be a full ceasefire, there has to be a demilitarization on the Ukraine side, a denazification, which has to do with elections, a neutrality statement, and the withdrawal of their forces from all four of the oblasts where they still have Ukraine troops. So there is some huge roadblocks and some real huge hurdles still yet to go towards getting an end of war agreement. And there's the Ukraine side is going to have to agree to a lot of things that it's going to be very, very distasteful. Now, that's going to really get into what is even possible here, because so far the Ukraine side, backed up by the European Union especially, has been talking about giving up nothing. We showed you their one of their members of parliament. We showed you a comment from Zelensky just within the last number of days where they still say, we will not give up any of our territorial integrity. We may temporarily cede some territory, but only with the understanding that we will later get that back. We won't change our constitution, so we're not going to give any rights to the Russian speakers who are in Ukraine. All the things that are key to them, and they say that no one will tell us who we can or can't have relations with, military relations with, and treaties. They also say they want the ability to continue to strengthen their arsenals, so they want more help from the West. All of those things are categorically rejected on the Russian side. So the two sides are still miles and miles apart on issues relating to the end of the war. And for Russia to agree to even a full ceasefire, almost certainly that gap is going to have to start narrowing. Now, both sides said that they want to continue immediately going to these discussions. They'll say in the Middle East, probably back into either Jeddah or Riyadh, one would imagine, since they do have some experience already there and they have the contacts, etc. But then let's get into now what the actual readout said, because there's some interesting things. There's a couple of commonalities, and then there's some also areas of differences. First of all, let's go to the U.S. readout. There's two in all of this this text here. There's really only two real key things I want to highlight. One of them is that the yellow one there in the middle, it says the leaders agreed that the movement to peace will begin with an energy and infrastructure ceasefire, as well as technical negotiations on implementing a maritime ceasefire. So actually, the only thing that's been agreed to right now is the actual air attack on energy and infrastructure. And then they're going to have negotiations on the implementation of the maritime ceasefire in the Black Sea. And then they're going to talk about a full ceasefire and a permanent peace. These negotiations will begin immediately in the Middle East. So you see there that the only firm thing has agreed to, a single thing that has come out so far for sure, and that is the no airstrikes on energy and infrastructure inside of the two countries. The rest of the stuff they're working on, even the Black Sea stuff. Gary, go back to that first one if you could. On the second thing was this is from the U.S. readout again, that the two leaders agreed that a future with an improved bilateral relationship between the United States and Russia was a huge upside. This includes enormous economic deals and geopolitical stability when peace has been achieved. So this reinforces another one of the factors that we've been telling you about all throughout this war here, especially since Trump has been elected, is that he is very, very focused on what comes next. Nobody needs to be confused on this point. Donald Trump, President of the United States, is doing everything he can to improve the conditions in the situation for the United States. He is not going to continue going down a path that he sees as has no fruit, that cannot be successful, i.e., continuing to supply ammunition, weapons, and everything else that's needed for the Ukraine side to continue fighting the war. That's not what he's interested in, because he has calculated and has said on several occasions that the war is unwinnable. So what is he going to do then? He is going to focus on what is going to be in the best interest of the United States. Now, I think that this is a subtle message. Maybe it's not so subtle, and behind the scenes, one would imagine it's much more direct with the Ukraine side, is that Trump is signaling, don't try to hold out for a great deal on the Ukraine side. If they think that what that parliamentarian that we showed you a week or so ago, what Zelensky has said recently, if they're still holding out for those things, they may be disappointed at how this works out, because if that huge gap in how each side sees the necessary conditions to bring a lasting peace and an end to the war, if that gap can't get narrowed, there's nothing for Donald Trump to negotiate. Doesn't matter how great of a negotiator he is, if this side is not willing to compromise on the issues necessary to get to the stronger side's agreement, then the war's not going to end. There won't even be a 30-day ceasefire, much less an end of the agreement. Now I want to go to the Russian the Russian readout. There's four things here I want to really highlight here. The first one, that the talks were from the Russian side were focused on a comprehensive and long-term settlement. The key parts here is that it says the Russian side wants to develop possible ways of a settlement which should be comprehensive, sustainable, and long-term in nature. And of course, take into account the unconditional need to address the root causes of the crisis, Russia's legitimate security interests. That's one thing that we've shown you several times that Sergei Lavrov has mentioned on a number of occasions. Vladimir Putin has been saying nonstop, really, from even before the war started, and definitely at all points afterwards, that the root causes, they keep using that phrase, the root causes have to be addressed, meaning that if the things that caused them to go to war in the first place are not addressed, if the conditions, which you saw the head of the Federation Council, we showed her, you call out from her a couple of days ago from last December, where they said everything from the Istanbul Agreement in April of 2022 will still be required. None of that will change, quote, one iota, she said. And that again includes the demilitarization of Ukraine down to 85,000 is the number that the Russians have set. The denazification, they're going to have an election for the Ukraine side that is valid. They're going to have to declare neutrality, i.e. no NATO now, later, or ever. And then they're going to have to surrender all four of the administration borders of the oblast. That's one of the really hard things for the Ukraine. But that's where Russia's mind is. That's the number one thing they said right up front, even before getting to the details. The second thing is that they have an objective here. If you can throw that back up there, they have an objective for a 30-day truce. So they, like Putin said the other day, he's in agreement with Trump that that's something they want to pursue. What their readout said was, in the context of the initiative of the President of the United States on the introduction of a 30-day truce with the Russians, the parties identifying a number of essential points regarding the provision of effective control over a possible ceasefire along the entire line of contact, the need to stop forced mobilization in Ukraine, and stop the rearmament of the armed forces of Ukraine. They also noted serious risk associated with the inability to negotiate with the Kiev regime, which was repeatedly sabotaged and violated the agreements that they had reached in the past. So that is really, really important there. So they're telling you, to get to a 30-day truce, you're going to have to, the Ukraine side is going to have to stop mobilizing. I frequently tell you about the difficulty that the Ukraine side has, where they're trying to force mobilize 30,000 per month, which is just a tremendously high number for what they have left. And it's very, very difficult, and the quality is very low. But now then, the Russians are saying for a 30-day ceasefire, that has to stop. You have to completely stop the process of going on that. The second thing is, it says they have to stop reinforcement, meaning that the Russians, and this is one of the things they talked about before, what their hesitation was, they didn't want to pause, which would then allow the Ukraine side to get back into, reinforcing the troops. One of the problems they've had in the frontline units is that they have a shortage of ammunition. They've had a shortage of weapons. They've had a shortage of supplies, all the things that you need to be able to sustain combat on a daily basis. Russia's saying, if there's a ceasefire, you're not going to be able to use that time to run supplies up, that you're not going to be able to bring everything back up to a full supply and get things stocked up to the front, so that at the end of the 30 days, or if the ceasefire ever breaks, then they have the capacity to do that. So those are two huge asks that it's going to be very, very difficult for the Ukraine side to have. And the second thing is, they're going back to the denazification category. is that they said, listen, right now, there's still a law on the books that says Zelensky cannot negotiate with Russia so long as Putin is in office. That apparently is still a law on the books. And the Russians saying, we can't have a 30-day truce to even talk about peace until it's legally available for your government to actually do that. Now, Ukraine, for its side, Zelensky has claimed, oh, well, that's actually not a law that prohibits me. I can change it if I want to. Maybe he can, maybe can't. I guess he can. He right now is the leader of the country, and there's probably nobody that's going to tell him any differently. So probably he could do that. But the problem is that the Russians won't recognize it. They'll say, no, we are strictly paying attention to the legality of it. If you have a law that says you can't, we're not going to negotiate with you, because why would we? If you can then go back and say, well, he wasn't actually legally authorized to do this, so we're not going to abide by it. So Russia is being a stickler because they can. Next thing on there, if we can pull that back up, Gary, it said that it is emphasized that the key conditions for preventing the escalation of the conflict and working towards its resolution by political and diplomatic means should be the complete cessation of foreign military assistance and the provision of intelligence to Ukraine. So not only are they looking at the tactical situation and saying for a 30-day ceasefire, Ukraine can't resupply its frontline troops, Ukraine can't mobilize its own forces, they're also saying the United States and Europe cannot provide either intelligence or any more ammunition and weapons. The whole pipeline, everything has to stop. So you're already starting to see these are some really high hurdles, not just in Kiev, not just in Washington, but also in Europe and all these countries I keep showing you about, this coalition of the willing, UK, France, Germany, et cetera. Everybody, or many of these countries anyway, are very enthusiastic about doing more and being more robust. You've seen Keir Starmer talk about how their plan is to give more to Ukraine this year than in any of the previous 3 years of war, et cetera. That all has to come to an end, or there's not going to be a ceasefire. The last thing that I want to point out here is, and this is the one area of continuity between the two readouts, is that the Russian side said that they have expressed mutual interest in normalizing bilateral relations in light of the special responsibility of the Russian and the United States for ensuring security and stability in the world. In this context, a wide range of areas was considered in which our countries could establish cooperation. A number of ideas moving forward towards the development in the perspective of mutually beneficial cooperation in the economy and energy were discussed. So just like President Trump, President Putin is looking beyond the war already. Once that's over, he wants to, come close to normalizing relations with the United States and normalizing relations with the Russians, doing business and that kind of thing. There's a lot of hostility toward that within Russia. I'll just let you know, there's a lot of people are against that. They don't want to do that. They want to continue moving east to the global south, the global east, and to the Asia area, and they don't even want to go back in here. But so far, Putin has said, no, we're gonna get back to some kind of normalized relations, because in his view, apparently he views that if he can get normalized relations with the West, that lowers the chances of anybody having any conflicts, no wars, no nuclear strikes, etc. And so that's something that the European side, or the West side, and the U.S. side, especially those not in the administration, will find that anathema, and they won't want to do that. But here's the thing: if we actually want to lower the chances of there being any future conflict, that's what we should all be pursuing. Everyone should be getting behind that. Because that, unfortunately, for many in the West, it's quite inconvenient, because it doesn't fit with their narrative that they keep trying to tell you that Russia just wants to conquer everybody. They want to go all the way to the English Channel, or at least take several NATO countries. That's what they keep telling you. But if instead you see Russia saying, hey, how's about we actually get back to doing business? Then if we're doing business, then there's no reason for anyone to fight. That's something that everybody in the West should get behind. Now, there were so many off-ramps and opportunities for this war to have come to a conclusion a long time ago. We didn't seem to want to take them. And now then here we are faced with the situation to where these really high hurdles on the Europeans, or for the European side and the Ukraine side, if they're not bridged, then folks, this 30-day, even temporary truce on the energy infrastructure, that's going to come to an end. And if there's nothing to replace it, then you see that will add. But every day that they delay in coming to this conclusion, the Russians are going to continue to move their forces forward. Right now, nothing is stopping any of that on either side of the line. That only benefits the Russian side because the Ukraine side is losing on anywhere. But if you want the war to stop, you're going to have to give in to these things. You're going to have to hold your nose. You're going to have to recognize that we had many opportunities as the West for this war to have not started or to have turned it off and to had a negotiated settlement with the Russians that could have happened at any point during these 3 years. Several key points in particular, and every time you said no, the conditions got worse for the Ukraine side. And now then, here we are at a point to where if we don't come to an agreement now, the Russians are simply going to continue fighting. And folks, just listen to me, hear me carefully. So far, all the evidence that we can see confirms that the Russians are going to have their security assured one way or the other. If they can get it through negotiations, if the Western side will cross these high hurdles, Putin is willing to go down that path. But if not, then he will simply keep doing what he's doing right now. And as you may have seen, Elizaveta Igorovna, who we had on, a Russian correspondent earlier today, just one viewpoint there, but we see this across the board. She said what we have seen many other places, that the Russian people are willing to pay whatever price it takes. If it took another 3 years, they're not war weary right now. And they see things going in their direction, both diplomatically, economically, and militarily. So we can dither all day long, but every day that waits raises the cost of failure on the Ukraine side. There will be a time where historians will come back and they'll be able to say what the exact casualty counts were, probably by the day. And so when they look back and say, okay, on the 18th of March, 2025, when there was an opportunity to end this through negotiated settlement, when the West had a chance to say, all right, we're going to pull the plug on here, we're going to end it, we're just going to hold our nose and do things we don't like to do, we're going to give in on all these things. There's going to have to be elections. There's going to be a demilitarization. There's going to, they're going to give up a lot of territory, but at the end of the day, then that's going to be a complete and total end of the war, and we're going to go back to normalized relations. If they're willing to do that, then the number will show that on the day that they did that, then the casualties stopped. But if they don't, the 19th, the 20th, the 28th, April the 13th, etc., all the way through, every single day, there will be more Ukrainian men die. There will be more Ukrainian territory lost. And in the end, you're probably going to get to the point to where Russia goes all the way up to the Dnieper River, however long that may take them. And let me reinforce to you that the assumption that it's taken Russia 3 years to get to this point, and it could take another 3 years to get to that point, assumes that the Ukrainian armed forces will continue to pay this horrific sacrifice in the knowledge that they can never succeed and they'll never falter. Maybe they will. I don't have a crystal ball. I can't predict the future. But I can tell you that the longer this goes on, the less likely that outcome is, and the more likely that you have a collapse and a breakage of the defense at some point, like you saw in the Kursk area. That could be a microcosm of what's to come. Once the Russians broke through somewhere they weren't expected with that gas pipeline, then the whole thing collapsed all the way down almost to the border. And there was a rapid drop. That same thing could happen on a larger scale if anywhere along the lines where they're currently pushing pressure, or if they introduce larger forces when the weather gets better, they could break through somewhere and then the whole line could collapse. That's a very real possibility. And we're gambling with the lives of Ukrainians, with this independence of the Ukraine that could exist right now if we keep ignoring that. And that's really where we are, and that's what's at stake right now. As this thing continues to evolve, and as we get more information, I'm certain there's going to be a lot of reaction from European Union, from other sources in the United States. We'll certainly be bringing all that to you, and definitely whatever the reaction is from the Ukraine side. As we were getting ready to come on, literally 1 minute before we did, I saw that Zelensky was actually making a live speech, so I don't have any idea what he was saying there. It wasn't translated. But as soon as we have that, certainly tomorrow we'll bring you that as well. So we'll keep you up on all of this, because that's what we do here at Daniel Davis Deep Dive. We are unintimidated and uncompromised to bring you the truth you need to make sense of the world around you, even when it's happening at warp speed like this one right here. Thank you very much, and we'll see you tomorrow on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.